Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's not a right that is natural rights like John Locke talked about. It's not a God-given right. It's not an enumerated right in the Bill of Rights, but it is a freedom. All of the little things that we do that government is not preventing us to do are a freedom, and to take it away is taking away a freedom. So sometimes we use the words right and freedom interchangeably. There is some difference, but only a minor difference when it comes to these types of conversations. I believe that the method of putting this bill in to get to drunk drivers is something that I am not philosophically in favor of. I think that the ends do not justify the means in this case. There are a number of other ways we can and do deal with drunk drivers. Just a very brief history on the bill. There were numerous attempts to have mandatory seatbelts, and until 1993, when the legislature made it that it was mandatory but secondarily enforced, it hadn't been. Now, that law was then referred to the people, and in I believe, June of 1994, the people narrowly upheld the law by 51.9%. And that was for secondary enforcement. The general will of the people was not for seatbelts. And so this comes back to a point I had brought up some time ago, which is that we don't want to give up our freedoms, yet we really do want to compromise, because that's just how we are. Another thing that wasn't commented for the purpose of having a seatbelt law is that we got more federal funding. Again, something I'm not particularly supportive of. A testimony back in 1993 by Martin Voller, who is a previous public service commissioner. He says, quote, "This bill is a foot in the door. It is written in this manner to make mandatory seatbelt usage more acceptable or palatable. This bill curtails even further our individual rights." Now, a couple of the arguments I think are appropriate would be the cost to society, at least to have a discussion on this. The unbelted accident victims that are under Medicaid certainly do pose an additional cost to society, to citizens. Those that are uninsured pose a cost to society in the way that those costs are passed on to hospitals and physicians. But we have to be really careful, because Obamacare in particular and other pieces of legislation really send us down that slippery slope very quickly. Every decision we make now that could potentially affect our health can somehow be seen as something the government should be interested in and control. We have choices that we make that might increase our risk of accident. Accidents, non-motor vehicle accidents, such as falls, specifically falls, cause 20% more deaths than motor vehicle accidents. So we should really be regulating usage of ladders, what time of day we go on the roofs, and so forth. The other things that cause a dramatically increased number of deaths are going to be obesity, heart disease, things like that. We can control all sorts of decisions that our citizens make if we're going to go down this path. As far as saving lives, seatbelts do save lives. I agree with that. Very few people are going to argue with that testimony. Changing it from a secondary enforcement to a primary enforcement may increase the seatbelt usage by up to 9%, according to NHTSA. We do have some other examples. Kansas, after they changed from secondary to primary, increased their seatbelt usage by 5%. So theoretically, by passing this law, we might prevent 4, maybe upwards of 7 deaths a year. But it's important that we don't forget the difference in valuing life, in wishing the citizens of North Dakota a very long and prosperous life, and wanting to force their behavior, their decision-making when it comes to health. If we want to legislate for the sole purpose of decreasing deaths in North Dakota, we should be looking at these other factors I talked about: ladders, obesity, physical activity, diet. I'm just going to close with 2 additional quotes. One is from an epic band called Devo in 1980. They say, "A victim of collision on the open sea, nobody ever said that life was free. Sank, swam, go down with the ship, but use your freedom of choice. I'll say it again in the land of the free, use your freedom of choice." The second quote, more seriously, it's very well worded. Back in 1993, during committee testimony, Bob Stenjum said this, quote, "I must bring to light one overriding point. That is, to regulate and enforce the use of seatbelts in the state of North Dakota is contrary to my and every citizen's rights. This bill must be considered from this important perspective, for if this infringement of rights is mandated, then where will the regulation of each citizen's life cease? This would constitute a precedent in removing one's individual rights, which would undoubtedly be followed by the further removal of rights in the future." Close quote. I agree with these sentiments wholeheartedly. We went down the path. We don't need to go down farther. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative